We'll be talking about this new book, A Minute for Caregivers, When Every Day Feels Like Monday. And we're not just talking about taking care of the elderly. Oftentimes there are very significant illnesses that we need to be a caregiver for. And it is part of a series of books that have been written by our guest, Peter Rosenberger. He, of course, has the syndicated radio program, Hope for the Caregiver, but also author of the book, Hope for the Caregiver, Encouraging Words to Strengthen Your Spirit, 7 Caregiver Landmines and How You Can Avoid Them, and some other topics that we will get into. An individual that has been really navigating his own wife's situation for more than 40 years, just a medical nightmare, which we'll have him talk about. 85 operations, ultimately the amputation of her legs, working with more than 100 physicians and 13 hospitals, soaring medical bills and the rest. And what is so intriguing about this is not only is it a wonderful resource for those of you that are caregivers right now, the foreword by Oliver North, Colonel Oliver North, a good friend of this ministry, and we're going to talk about his caregiving of Betsy. But first of all, Peter, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much for having me. It is a thrill to be with you.
Might just mention for our listeners, if they're not familiar, you are on about 200 different radio stations with a weekly program called Hope for the Caregiver. And I guess maybe the best way to get started is to talk about Ollie North, who's been on the program with us many times, going all the way back to Marlon Maddox, who was the original host of Point of View. And when there was such a devastating diagnosis of his wife, Betsy, and he's talked about Betsy so many times on the program, he was admonished to be the best caregiver Betsy could ever have. And that's about the time you sent him a draft of this book. And he said, finally, I thought, someone who knows what I'm going through. He's been there and done that. So in some respects, people would not necessarily expect Colonel North to have written an endorsement of a book on caregiving. But once you know his background and his family and his conviction about this, that is the individual that wrote the endorsement for the book.
Indeed. And, you know, the thing that he brought out about it is it gave him what in the military is known as situational awareness. And he said, in the military, situational awareness is going to keep you alive on the battlefield. He said, but I didn't have any as a caregiver until I read your book. And I didn't put that together necessarily in a military sense. I just saw that as caregivers, we become so disoriented when we are in the throes of this. And there are people out there, 65 million Americans right now serving as a family caregiver. And so how do you help them? What does that look like? Where's safety? Where's solid ground? All of those questions and more just slam caregivers every day. And I was grateful that he saw that and saw that it was helpful to his situation with Betsy. And he came on my program and we had a very long talk about it. It was just very meaningful because here's a guy that, you know, I have admired for a very long time. And I was grateful that he found value in what I did.
Well, you know, whenever you are facing some of these ongoing situations, and we're talking about dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, cerebral palsy, we're talking about various kind of mental addictions, all sorts of afflictions and things of that nature, the divorce rate just goes through the roof, as you well know. And it does seem to me that this is such an important resource for individuals who are going through this if they want to keep their family intact, they want to keep their marriage intact, and also be able to just deal with the day-to-day demands of being a caregiver. That's really what your radio program is about, and even this book.
It is, and the goal is, for my program, for what I do, is to strengthen that family caregiver. Healthy caregivers make better caregivers. But what does healthy look like when you're in the throes of this? What does healthy look like when you're pulling your hair out, when you're up at 2 a.m. cleaning up stuff, when you're back and forth to the emergency room, when you are dealing with as somebody with an addiction issue? And the divorce rate, as you said, it is astronomical. It's almost 90% if you have a disability in the family.
Wow.
And that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and we've seen that, churches, unfortunately, many times. Yeah. Think
about all the pastors who are just overwhelmed, and they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. People didn't know what to say to me. And they said the words. My father's a minister, and he told me, he said, I didn't even know what to say to you. They said the words. You can quote the words, but if it doesn't penetrate into your heart, the language of your heart, and I actually got that from friends of mine who are Wycliffe Bible translators over in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's what the model with Wycliffe, and he told me, he said, everybody in the Congo speaks French or Swahili, and so the Bible's been translated that we could say it. He said, but we're translating into their tribal tongues, the language of their hearts, and that's when their faces just come alive. And I thought, do caregivers have a language of our hearts? And I realized, yeah, we do. And so that's what I do is I speak fluent caregiver, and I speak that to my fellow caregivers, and I've learned to do this over a lifetime of this. But the better news, Kerby, is that fluent caregiver, when I learn to speak, that's our Savior's native tongue. Yes. That's who he is. And
Peter,
that's the greater news.
Peter Rosenberger with us. And again, I might just mention we have a link to his website, hopeforthecaregiver.com. And so if you would like to know more about that, that is the case. But Peter, let's for just a minute kind of talk about how the book is structured. 115 different sort of 1-minute devotionals, which have usually a Bible verse or a quote or something at the end. And really, this is an attempt to give you, in the midst of the really almost the chaos that sometimes comes by being a caregiver, to have just a moment of reflection and nourishment in the midst of what is sometimes an all-demanding kind of activity.
I know my audience. I know my fellow caregivers. I know this world. We don't have time to read these long treatises. Sometimes all we get is just a minute at a time. So I wrote this literally. You can read it a minute at a time. You could read it from back to forward, forward to back. You don't have to start anywhere. I didn't even put a table of contents. You could pick it up and go anywhere in the book. Give me 1 minute and I'll point you to safety. I tell people it's so easy you could read it in the bathroom. I know, that's where I wrote it. No, I'm just kidding, Kerby. I'm just kidding. But Oliver North people were glad that I turned the manuscript in on 2-ply. How about that?
Yes. Oh, so good. I want to get into a couple of issues. First of all, maybe you can deal with some of the misconceptions. I sort of alluded to one just a minute ago. You talk about that in the book. When you talk about caregiver, you almost always think elderly. Okay, I'm thinking dementia, Alzheimer's, ALS. We're thinking of somebody 70 plus, but not at all. And so that's the first issue. Maybe then talk a little bit about some of the very important emotional needs that need to be addressed for the caregiver. We've spent so much time giving out, we never are taking in, and so I want to get your thoughts about that. A couple of other topics in here. As we said, 115 very short, kind of devotional, but well-written pieces from an individual that has been a caregiver for so many decades now, speaks caregiving, and understands your circumstances. So you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we do have a link to hopeforthecaregiver.com. There is a place where you can find out a little bit more about, of course, Peter's radio program, his podcast. You can actually join a Facebook group if you would want. There are all sorts of resources there. And, of course, that is just one of a number of books, but this one, quite readable, very easy to cover. And, Peter, for just a minute, let's if we talk about some of the misconceptions. One I've alluded to, and I'm sure you have some others, that when we talk about caregivers, almost always we think of caregiving for the elderly. Well, that's true. That's only part of the story, isn't it?
Indeed. I've been a caregiver since I was 22. And so I don't consider 22 elderly.
No.
I don't even consider myself elderly at this point, even though there are people in our society that may. But I see young special needs families. I see children who are caring for disabled adults. I see everything and every demographic out there. One thing about disability and affliction and chronic impairments is that it knows no race, no religion, no age, there's no lines of demarcation whatsoever. It affects all of us. It is the human condition.
What about some of the emotional needs of individuals? It seems to me that you can be in a giving out mode as a caregiver, and you're never ministering to your own needs. And after a while, you're trying to minister out of a dry well. What about that?
Well, you have to drink as you pour. And what does that look like? Part of that, I think, for caregivers is, from the conversations I've had, caregivers suffer from what I call the 3 I's. We lose our independence, we become isolated, and we lose our identity. And I'd like to zero in on that identity issue. When you ask a caregiver, how are you doing? And they respond in third person singular. Well, she had a bad night, or he's not doing too well, or first person plural. well, we just got home from the hospital, or our situation is such and such. And I stop them, and I do this for every caller to my show. No, I want to know how you're doing. And whatever comes after the word I, now we're going to have a real conversation. Now, there may be some tears, there may be resentment, anger, whatever. It doesn't matter, but it's a real conversation. We got to get caregivers speaking in their own voice. That is the first step to being healthy, is to recognize that you have your own voice. And usually when caregivers speak from their own voice, that's when the tears and the stammering comes, and it takes practice. It takes people being careful with them. And you don't want to go up to a caregiver and say, well, let me know if there's something I can do to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I got to think of something for you to do. And then I got to hope you'll do it. And then I got to hope that you'll do it right. And then I won't have to clean it up. And then I got to wonder how long you're going to do it before you bail on me. So the best thing to do with caregivers is, if you're not a caregiver, if you want to help them, is to start off something simple and look at them in the eyes and say, I see you. I see you. And I see the magnitude of what you carry, and I hurt with you. If we could just start with that conversation to our fellow caregivers. Caregivers don't require a lot of complex entertainment engagement. Sometimes, and I say this in my book, sometimes it's as simple as a kind word and a bowl of soup. And we have a responsibility, because look here, if you love somebody, you're probably going to be a caregiver. If you live long enough, you're going to need one. So we all got a stake in this. And helping caregivers stay healthy and strong is why I do everything that I do. And it's personal for me, because I keep seeing myself. I see that 22-year-old version of myself who was not elderly. I was just in love with a beautiful woman who had a broken body, and I didn't understand anything of what that meant for me. I was dumber than a box of hammers. But here we are now, and I'm 60 years old, and I'm still caregiving. In fact, tomorrow I'm taking her to yet another doctor, another specialist they wanted to see before she has this 86th surgery that she was already supposed to have, but they saw something with her heart they wanted to check out. So we're going to do that. Then we'll get her to the neurosurgeon and fix this thing in her back. So this is ongoing. It never ends. It never ends with me.
Well, again, when some people are thinking right now, what does normal look like for you? Well, normal is what most people would consider abnormal, but a normal day for a caregiver, and in particular for you and Gracie, is something that is so-called new normal that you have to adjust to, and that's just another one of those kind of aspects. You have a chapter in there, for example, when we rob ourselves, to talk about this issue of grief. Really, in some respect, caregivers are going through a grief process just as the individual being cared for in the first place.
You do. You grieve daily because you see someone you love suffer. You see them struggle. You see the losses. You grieve over things that'll never happen. There's always all kinds of grief. And normal for me, back to your other point, what is normal? Mm-hmm. I wrote one of the chapters I wrote in this book, I wrote in the emergency room, and it's called Quiet in the Room. And I was in the emergency room with Gracie. She was there. They were having to do some kind of infusion with her. And there was not, it wasn't a huge crisis, comparatively speaking, with us. And yet I had a deadline. So I took my laptop, and on those trays where they serve you meals, I just sat there and wrote that while they're working on her and things are beeping, and I'm quietening the room. That's the title of that particular chapter, because Scripture tells me that we can be calm no matter what's going on around us.
That's amazing. But again,
Jesus slept in the boat, so I could ride in the emergency room.
I guess so. Good line. Also, there's another aspect of that, and that is you do address that as well in terms of trying to figure out when you're dealing with all the medical issues. I mean, it almost requires that you be an organized person, and you also have to be sort of an amateur physician, because there are just so many questions that surface and so many really weighty questions that a caregiver has to begin to decide, oftentimes, especially if you're dealing with somebody who has some kind of memory care issues.
You do. You have to be organized. And my martial arts instructor told me once, I got a second degree black belt in Hapkido. Should be further down the road, but we moved to Montana, and I don't have anybody to train with. I'd love to be a fourth degree right now, but you've heard of Shogun. Well, I'm Show Enough.
Show Enough.
No. But my martial arts instructor told me, well, she said, fight what's closest. If you got a guy that's 60 yards away and you got a guy that's 6 yards away, you're going to have to deal with the guy that's 6 yards away. And that's, for us as caregivers, we have to learn to what's the immediate need right now. I'm going to have to deal with right now. I can't live in the wreckage of my future 5 years from now. I'm going to have to live right now and deal with today. The scripture says this over and over and over, but in our culture, we don't want to live like that. It's hard to have a 5-year plan when you're in the middle of a hurricane all the time, boarding up your house. But that's the way a lot of caregivers live. Well, I talk about that in the book. And how do we settle ourselves down and deal with right now, right here? And that's part of being organized, is learning how to prioritize what is immediate and what can be delayed for a little bit of time until we catch our breath.
You have a chapter, of course, on the caregiver fog, and that's what happens too, fear, obligation, guilt, but also just the fog of the busyness and just so much happening simultaneously. But just before I run out of time, Peter, I wanted to point people to your website, which is hopeforthecaregiver.com. I know right now we have lots of individuals that are caregivers, and as you said, if you're not a caregiver, you will be a caregiver, and if you're not a caregiver, someday somebody will be caring for you. So in a sense, everybody should take advantage of some of the resources that you have there. So talk about that, because there's a Facebook group. Of course, there's your podcast, there's your radio program, there are the other books, and even if people would want to have you come and speak, those are all available. There's an email list. So talk about what is available for our listeners if they want to learn a little bit more about caregiving.
All that and above. When I started doing my radio program, Kerby, they looked at me like, this is not going to fly. How are you going to fill up a whole hour on this? Well, that was well over a dozen years ago, and I have over 700 episodes on my podcast, and we're just getting started. So there is so much there to unpack for the family caregivers, particularly when you add in addiction and alcoholism, which I do, because if you're in a relationship with an addict or an alcoholic, you're a caregiver. It's a different kind of caregiver, but no mistake, you're there. It's all at my website. Get the book, download the podcast. It's free. Join the mailing list. Get in the Facebook group. Do what you can to push back against the isolation. I'm offering it, and I'm asking you to take advantage of it. hopeforthecaregiver.com.
Yep. Again, you talked about isolation. You talked about identity and so many other issues, and you can find it. Of course, we have the link on our website, or you can go directly to hopeforthecaregiver.com. You'll find everything that you need to know. And, of course, the book, I'll hold it up real quickly. Those of you watching online, A Minute for Caregivers When Every Day Feels Like Monday. And a really powerful endorsement and forward by Colonel Oliver North, which I thought was very intriguing as well. So, again, thank you for your radio program. Thank you for your books. And thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it has been my pleasure. Thank you.
Peter Rosenberger. And again, the book is entitled A Minute for Caregivers. I would encourage you to get a copy of that. And pastors, I don't see how you could survive without having one of these on your bookshelf, because that's what you do on a very regular basis and minister to people that are caregivers. So that is a resource I wanted to make available to you. We hope you appreciated the conversation we had here today. And don't forget that if you would like more information about what we're talking about, you can find it at the website pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.